right here.
On this video, I would like to do a brief summary of the different approaches to the book of Revelation and how people have approached it. First of all, let me say that one of the reasons Revelation is difficult is because of the apocalyptic language. That is, Revelation uses symbol to teach truth. And many people want to interpret it just like they're interpreting, say, the book of Romans or the book of Ephesians, but it's very different. It's apocalyptic, meaning you're using visions or pictures to teach truth from those, pictures or illustrations or the way that it is being written. And so when we literalize everything, I think we miss the way that literature works. As we look at apocalyptic literature, it grew up from about 200 BC to possibly, I'm thinking, 200 AD. And you have a number of books at that time that would be apocalyptic. For example, like the book of Enoch is a classic example of that style of writing. Having said that, in the Old Testament, you have a book like Daniel, which follows apocalyptic kind of style, especially in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. Critical scholars, hence late date Daniel, into about 165 to 167 BC. Conservative scholars say, no, it's written by Daniel much earlier. So apocalyptic use in Daniel need not be placed in a later period. So you have this discussion going on. But apocalyptic style is the key to understanding a book like Revelation, many believe. In light of that, how has the book been approached? I would like to give a brief summary in my own understanding. Some approach the book from what is called a strictly preterist point of view. That means the book was fulfilled past tense, preteristically or past tense, so that the fulfillment of the book has to do with the Roman Empire oppressing Christians and John's writing to encourage believers to go on with Christ, who will bring an eternal kingdom and will someday bring an end to the Roman Empire. And they just stop at that point, that it was fulfilled historically when Rome finally fell. Others follow what is called a futuristic approach to Revelation. In other words, everything in Revelation is future or futuristically understood. For example, especially Revelation chapter 6 through 18, some believe that this is, or this position would believe that this is all future. And they see Revelation in this way, that the Lord is going to have a future tribulation period, which often goes back to Daniel 9, the 70th week of Daniel. And during that period of time, there's several different approaches. Those who hold to a pre-tribulational rapture believe that the church will be raptured out before that period starts. Arguments used will be the church was not appointed to wrath, and so God's going to bring the church out before that time. Others believe that the church will go through that period of tribulation. Some believe that the church would be raptured or caught up before that period starts. And like I said, others believe after that period of tribulation. Some believe even during the middle part of that period. Others believe that there will be no future millennium. And there's those that argue that there is a premillennial return of Christ, that Christ will come back before the millennium. The church then will be caught up as a welcoming party, depending on where one places that welcoming, whether it's before the tribulation period or at the end. And those who hold either of those positions are premillennial. They believe that Christ will come before the millennium that's talked about in Revelation chapter 20. Then there are those that are what we call, or what is called, what they would call themselves no millennium or amillennium. That is, that the tribulation period is the time in this world that will get worse and will have a future intensive worsening with a future man of sin. And then Christ will come back for a general resurrection. And the millennium then is understood more from an Augustinian point of view, more from Augustine, that the martyrs of Revelation 20 reign with Christ now, and that there's no future millennium of the reign of martyrs that's talked about, but they're reigning right now with Christ in heaven, along with believers who have died, who basically aren't martyrs, but who followed Christ, along with the martyrs that have died. So those are some of the different positions. And the other thing is then, how literal does one interpret the book of Revelation? When we talk about a lamb and we look at a beast with 10 horns and 7 heads, Revelation, for example, 13, how literal is that to be taken? And those who try to follow the apocalyptic type of literature without over-literalizing, believe that is simply symbol teaching the evil of the Roman Empire and what the Roman Empire was like, and encouraging the believers to press on. Let me say this, Revelation 7 is a perfect illustration, possibly, of what we're trying to talk about when we talk about interpretation or hermeneutics, hermeneutics meaning interpretation. In chapter 7 of Revelation, it speaks of 144,000 sealed out of Israel, out of the different tribes, 12,000 out of each tribe. This is followed then by the picture of a great multitude out of every nation, following that in chapters 9 to 17. Those who take the more literal approach will say this has to do with literal Israel during the tribulation period, in which there will be those that will be marked with God's protection, and then they'll become witnesses to Gentiles that will come in mass, and that's the multitude out of every nation. So there's 2 different groupings then at that point with that interpretation. Those who see the symbolism here will view the 144,000 as a symbolic number representing the church. The church is often referred to as the Israel of God, for example, and that basically the multitude coming out of every nation is the promise that out of every nation, every people, that sealed 144,000 will make it into that eternal new heaven and new earth. So I'm just trying to illustrate, and I'm not trying to argue one position over against another, but those who follow more of an amillennial position also often would interpret a text like this in more of a non-literal way, that we're looking at the Israel of God sealed with God's protection, who now come out of that period of tribulation, which is applied to the world as a whole, so that the Roman Empire represents the world system, and not only in its present form, but in its final form, and that out of every nation will be those having been sealed who will come and stand before the Lamb. And he goes on to say, they'll be before the throne of God, and they will worship the Lord day and night in his temple. And furthermore, he talks about how they will never hunger anymore, nor thirst, nor will the sun come upon them, meaning like a sunstroke, but used in a spiritual sense. And the Lamb, which is in the midst of the throne, will shepherd them. And he'll continue to shepherd them, speaking of Christ, and he'll bring them to wells of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And so an approach that looks at this as apocalyptic will say this is a way of saying in John's writing that the church, the Israel of God, will be protected and brought out into the very presence of the Lamb someday in that eternal heaven and new earth, where there'll be no more tears, no more crying, and so forth. And like I said, those who take the other interpretation take it very literally, some do, or many do, during the future tribulation period, and that the multitude is different from the sealing of the 144,000 as literal Jewish converts during that tribulation period. So those are the different viewpoints in terms of hermeneutics or interpretation. And whatever position one holds, I think it's helpful to see how godly scholars have tried to wrestle with the book of Revelation. And I think it's fair to say, let's look at the different viewpoints and then come to a decision that one might personally feel to be where they're more comfortable. At least one is aware then of the different ways of approaching a book like Revelation. And most amillennial interpreters would see the vision of chapter 16 talking about the same group of people, the church being marked as the Israel of God, and then composed of all nations coming before the Lamb. The other position would see a literal sealing of a converted Jewish remnant during the tribulation period, and then a great multitude coming out of their witness and so forth. So again, I just wanted to reflect on the different viewpoints. Whatever viewpoint you decide is between, I feel, a believer and the Lord. But just knowing what the different viewpoints are, I think is educational and helpful.